reactor accident ever. The official Soviet view. Reactor building roof blown away, but Moscow says the accident is over. The danger is past. A much different, much more dangerous view seen from Western satellites above. Enhanced eye-in-the-sky views that U.S. intelligence says is a reactor gone wild accident still in progress and a second reactor possibly melting down. Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Even as the Soviets stuck to their official story of only 2 dead, no more fire, no more radiation, Moscow did acknowledge for the first time today that there were what it called 197 people injured and hospitalized. In addition to the regular satellite photographs, CBS News tonight obtained enhanced satellite photos showing what appear to be 2 nuclear reactor hotspots where the Soviets insist there are none. Defense Department correspondent David Martin reports.
This computer-enhanced photograph taken by a commercial satellite shows the damaged Chernobyl reactor, where U.S. officials say there is a possibility of a second meltdown at an adjoining reactor. These satellite photos, taken with an infrared camera, appear to show 2 pinpoints of heat coming from the 2 reactors. But Swedish satellite experts say they can't tell whether the source of that heat is a meltdown or a fire. Informed U.S. sources say more detailed pictures taken by a U.S. spy satellite show Soviet aircraft circling the reactor building, apparently dumping chemicals on the still burning fire.
Probably burning from the top down. There's still very high temperatures existing in the core. The radiation levels within the plant itself are so very high that I would expect it to be very difficult to take any corrective action there.
This picture, flashed on Soviet television tonight, appears to contradict the U.S. version. It shows a badly damaged building with roof blown off and walls caved in, but there is no sign of a fire, evidence which the Kremlin says proves the disaster is under control. U.S. officials say the explosion which started the fire also blew holes in the roof of the generator building next door and presumably did considerable damage to the other reactor. One senior administration official said, quote, there could be a meltdown at that one as well. Speaking for cameras, another senior administration official was more cautious.
The design of this facility also includes some joint operation of those 2 units from a common control area, again leading to conjecture about the potential of problems at the other unit. But we have no information at this point that would indicate that there are problems at the other unit.
U.S. officials believe the disaster at Chernobyl began on Friday with a loss of coolant in the reactor's nuclear core. The first meltdown occurred on Saturday, venting radioactive gases that were detected in Sweden 2 days later. Whatever the Soviets did to cope with the meltdown apparently touched off an explosion of hydrogen gas on Sunday, spewing more radioactive material into the air. U.S. officials still do not have a good idea of how many Soviets may have been killed.
U.S. officials say the actual number of dead and injured will depend in part on whether the Soviets began evacuating the area at the first sign of trouble last Friday. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
All over Europe, even in some Soviet bloc countries, special health measures are being taken tonight, no matter what the Soviets are telling their own people and the world. Again today, the official Soviet line was to say everything's fine and to say little more. Wyatt Andrews in Moscow begins our coverage of the official Soviet view and the clouds of doubt about it almost everywhere else.
To hear it from the Soviet point of view, the accident is all but over. Radiation levels are lower, the announcement said. Then came this picture and the comment, as you can be convinced for yourself, there was no enormous destruction. And the Soviets stuck to the story that there are but 2 dead, the air and water around Kiev safe. As if for emphasis, the newscast showed this feature on happy Kiev Soviets preparing for May Day. But that's the official story. Tourists leaving Kiev today told of much higher casualty figures and rumors of tainted water. French students interviewed by CBS News quoted a hospital source saying it's common knowledge in Kiev that 500 are dead. American professor Karen Black said a government tour guide also put the death toll in the hundreds.
We heard about it yesterday morning from our tourist guide, who told us fatalities were thought to be in the range of 300.
The scenes of blossoms and festivity were also contradicted by a Soviet ham radio operator. The unconfirmed broadcast said that hundreds were dead and wounded, and that thousands were fleeing south with carts and animals. Dutch radio operator Anis Kaufman said he heard the message.
Not 1, but 2 reactors melted down and destroyed and on fire. And he ended the message, tell what's happening here and ask the world to help us.
The Soviet reluctance to tell what's happening is glaring. Satellite transmissions planned by the American networks were canceled tonight. Tourists traveling to and from Kiev are growing angry at the lack of Soviet warnings.
I'm very concerned. I think that we should have been informed if there had been an accident before we went there.
I feel we should have been informed about the accident. I think some people are very concerned about it.
The American embassy has advised travelers don't go to Kiev. The British, the French, the Germans all plan evacuations of their citizens from the Kiev region just as a precaution and just because the Soviets won't talk about contamination. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Moscow.
This is the Polish side of the Soviet border, less than 300 miles from Chernobyl. People here are worried and angry because the Soviets didn't give the warning immediately. Medical sources in the Białystok area of northeastern Poland said radiation levels there were 15 times higher than normal today and rising. Even after the bare-bones announcement in Poland Monday night, quoting the Soviets, people weren't told how serious the problem is. Even so, the Poles know more than their Soviet neighbors. Polish radio and television keep talking about the accident and the spread of radiation. Health authorities were told only last night they had to do something about it. What they've done is to order children under 16 to take an iodine-potassium solution meant to hinder the body's absorption of radiation. Children near the border were told to stay indoors. Authorities have banned the sale of milk from cows that may have grazed on contaminated grass. In some places, all fresh dairy products were taken off the shelves, creating a run on supplies of powdered milk. On the national news broadcast tonight, a panel of experts answered some of the questions they said were inundating government switchboards. Even if the present radiation levels were to continue for a month, they said, there would be no chance of radiation disease. But Poles, who are generally skeptical about what their government tells them, weren't convinced. One woman said after the broadcast, "My son is not going outside, and I'm not serving salads." Kurt Quint, CBS News, Warsaw.
Across Western Europe tonight, Soviet ambassadors delivered the party line. The accident, they said, wasn't all that bad.
The situation is under control.
But tonight was a little late. The political fallout has already descended. In Venice, at a meeting of 7 European nations, a demand that Moscow shut down all nuclear reactors similar to the one in Chernobyl. In Germany, a shift in wind direction sent a little radiation and a lot of fear into Bavaria for the first time.
Oh, it's bad. Nobody knows.
In Austria, families arriving home from near the accident area were checked for radiation. In Finland and Sweden, anger about the possible effects on children, food, and about Soviet secrecy.
I think it's a disgrace that they haven't told us about it.
We don't know what's going to happen next.
Europeans are not alone. Virtually everyone is hearing the sound of Soviet silence. At the BBC monitoring service, specialists who listen in on Russian radio, including Radio Kiev, report all they're hearing is that everything's okay.
I would say it's almost possible to live in the Soviet Union and not know that anything out of the ordinary had happened.
But why would Soviet authorities fail to promptly notify even their own people, especially considering the dangers?
It's typically Russian because if it goes back, I think, 50 years, because the Soviet state was very insecure. And they felt that if they reveal something which is weak, the Soviet Union is seen to be a failure. The Soviet Union must seem to be a country in which everything works.
And that, of course, doesn't do Western Europe much good, where about the only reliable information from the very beginning has come from monitoring the air. Bill Redeker, CBS News, London.
In a moment, we'll continue our extended worldwide look tonight at this still unfolding, almost incredible nuclear disaster. On our eye, what happens to the people and the land closest to the source of the spewing radiation in the Soviet Ukraine? And what happens when and if the fallout reaches the skies over the United States? Numbers of Western officials and scientists today said they believe the Soviet nuclear reactor fire is still burning and could keep burning possibly for weeks out of control.
The Soviet accident is igniting 1,000 tons of graphite, normally used to help control the atomic reactions. Huge fires are hard to stop. Graphite fires may be impossible to control.
Basically what's happened is the graphite gains heat a little at a time until some point it burns like charcoal would burn in your barbecue, red hot.
So hot that the water itself flashes into steam, causing the further spread of radiation.
Nobody's going to be able to do anything on it. They're just going to have to sit back and let it burn itself out. It might take 1 to 4 weeks, might even go 6 weeks. Who knows?
Doing nothing, and perhaps nothing can be done, could lead to the so-called China syndrome, the meltdown burning completely through the ground, reaching underground water, which then would cause an explosion, blowing out clouds of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Radioactive contaminated clouds have already moved west to Poland and Austria, north to Scandinavia, east several hundred miles from Kiev.
Not far from that big city of Kiev, the Soviet population equivalent of, say, Chicago, in and around the Soviet Ukraine farm country, there are the people closest to this atomic accident ground zero. What about the people? Susan Spencer has been investigating the short-term medical worries and the long-term medical dangers.
20,000 Soviet citizens live near the power plants. How much radiation they got or are getting, how many of them ultimately will die, is a mystery as big as the accident itself.
For the people where the accident occurred, the horror is just beginning.
Exposure to high levels of radiation, as might be found at the plant, can cause collapse of the central nervous system. Death can be instant. At more moderate exposures, the digestive and immune systems fail. Virtually no one survives a week. At lower levels, the immune system is damaged, but many victims do live. Experts say pregnant women early in pregnancy are especially vulnerable, even to very low levels.
This exposure would result to 100% incidence of malformations. In other words, this baby will be malformed in almost 100% of cases.
And as victims of past atomic blasts well know, problems don't stop after the first exposure. Over time, radioactive isotopes can concentrate in the body, in the thyroid gland, and in the bones.
Bone tumors, leukemia, thyroid cancer are the major risks in areas where high depositions occur.
The Polish authorities are giving their children the only known drug against radiation's long-term effects. Only the decades will get rid of the radioactivity now in the air, water, and soil. Already, radioactive cesium has turned up in the rainwater of Sweden.
Anyone who tells you that they really know how all this will come out is fooling themselves.
The Soviets say they have evacuated 4 villages near the plant. Health experts here only hope that by now they have done much more than that. Susan Spencer, CBS News, Washington.
It's being done to keep tabs on Soviet radioactive debris if and when the world's weather patterns bring some of it to the United States. James McManus has been checking the checkers.
They are monitoring in Tumwater, Washington, and across the United States, waiting for an invisible rain of submicroscopic radioactive debris from the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Depending upon worldwide weather conditions, it could reach the U.S. mainland in a few days.
The most logical way in which it might come to the United States is across the Pacific and reach the West Coast. But that, as I say, was at least, I would say, a week off.
From 68 radiation monitors scattered across 50 states, the air samples come here to an Environmental Protection Agency laboratory in Montgomery, Alabama. In the days ahead, if indicators signal a rise above ordinary background radiation in the U.S., more intensive testing of air, rainwater, and milk will be triggered. But EPA officials do not expect to find a sharp increase in radiation.
If and when it will eventually get here, it will be hardly measurable and relatively insignificant.
But they're taking no chances. Nationwide air samples are routinely checked twice a week. Now they're doing it every day. Experts here say it's impossible to predict the patterns and intensities of potential radioactive fallout. But given the information so far available on the nuclear disaster in the Soviet Union, federal officials do not foresee danger to public health in the United States. James McManus, CBS News, at the EPA Radiation Laboratory in Montgomery.
The nuclear fallout from the Soviet disaster isn't due in this country until the weekend. The economic fallout is already here. News of the nuclear accident combined with general pessimism over parts of the American economy to send stock prices tumbling to their biggest one-day loss in history. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell almost 42 points in active trading. And on the Chicago Board of Trade today, wheat and corn prices jumped amid uncertainty over the effects of the nuclear accident in an important Soviet farming region. 4 days before the economic summit in Tokyo, and there's a rush of riches for Japan. The Japanese have announced a record trade surplus of almost $62 billion this year as of March 1. At the same time, the U.S. Commerce Department announced today that this nation ran up a record trade deficit with Japan in March, part of an overall trade deficit that jumped more than 16% to $14.5 billion. Neither the summit nor the economy monopolized President Reagan's attention today. He took time to express regrets to Soviet leader Gorbachev about the nuclear accident near Kiev, and the Reagan administration moved quickly to try to reassure all Americans that domestic nuclear power plants are safe. Not everyone, of course, believes that. Our look at President Reagan's view and some voices of dissent begins with Leslie Stahl.
The president's day off on tropical Bali was interrupted by a briefing on the Soviet nuclear accident, a decision made that the U.S. would be open, fully informative, to draw a contrast with the Soviet silence. And there was criticism of Moscow for not warning those in danger.
TASS made the announcement after the Swedes had told the world that they were picking up this extra radiation. The Soviets didn't voluntarily come forth with this.
And the administration tried to be reassuring.
It could not happen in the United States because we have a number of facilities to prevent it. Should any radiation reach the U.S., it is highly unlikely that it would be a level that would pose any threat to public health.
The president strolled with Mrs. Reagan along the beach while officials expressed some bafflement at the Soviets for not taking up the president's offer of assistance on how to decontaminate and how to test the population and the food. And the White House began an effort to fight what it expects will be a renewed movement to close down nuclear power plants in the U.S.
Nuclear power is a good thing for the future of many nations, including our own. We shouldn't just throw out the baby with the bathwater and condemn all nuclear power plants because of this.
Officials say that because this took place at the Soviets' newest reactor, it's another indication of the inferiority of Soviet technology. And they say the Soviets brought on the accident by not taking the same kind of safety precautions taken in the United States. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, with the president in Bali.
Back home today, not everyone shared the administration's confidence in nuclear plant safety. These pickets turned out in New Hampshire. And at a nuclear plant under construction in Georgia, they were practicing an evacuation, just in case what the administration said today could not happen, does happen. The drill confused some residents.
They put up the sign, but they didn't tell us where to go.
That kind of confusion worries some experts who note the majority of the 98 nuclear reactors operating in this country are near heavily populated areas. For example, there are 6 nuclear reactors within 100 miles of Times Square, the heart of a metropolitan area that is the home for 17 million people.
No one has been convinced that any of these plans are going to work. And all of the drills indicate that there are significant flaws. Even under the best of conditions, none of the drills has worked out.
In New York, state and local officials have refused to participate in federal emergency evacuation plans that are being drawn up for this new nuclear plant on Long Island. They argue such a gargantuan task is impossible. When Washington officials claimed local cooperation was unnecessary, the federal official on the scene quit in protest.
The federal government can't protect anyone. It's state and local government that protects. The federal government's going to take them 3 days to get themselves moving.
Even the experts who don't agree with Patron conceded today that publicity about the Soviet disaster, at the very least, will force re-examination and probably an overhaul of existing emergency evacuation plans. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, New York.